back on One True Podcast, talking Baylor and Big 12 college football. Alongside me, as always, is John Werner. And our special guest this week from right here in town, we have Matt Roberts from KWKT, Fox 44. Matt, thanks for joining us.
I appreciate that. It's special guest. I like that. I appreciate you guys having me on. I'm honored.
Guest star.
Hey, Matt, I don't see you on enough Zoom, so I thought we should add one here.
Yeah, I know. I can't wait to see you guys in person again. I feel like we see each other all the time, just, not enough in person.
Yeah, no doubt. I thought Matt would be appropriate to have on this week just because Matt has connections obviously here in Waco covering the Bears, but also very well acquainted with Texas Tech, an alum of Tech. What's the communication school there called?
We don't have a name just yet. I've heard the Scott Pelley School of Journalism bandied about, but I don't think any of them quite have a name yet. So it's just the Texas Tech School of Mass Communication. So back when you could actually major in broadcast journalism, before they kind of converged at all. So
the olden days.
Yeah, the olden days. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So Matt went to Tech. He actually worked in Lubbock. He worked in Abilene and Baton Rouge, and now has been in Waco for about 4 years. So, glad to. Matt does a great job over there at 44, and thought he'd be good to have on. And so we're glad that you're joining us. So guys, this is the first time since 2008 that Baylor will make that little drive out to Lubbock. And just to put that in perspective, that was Art Briles' first season at Baylor. So it's been a while.
Well, and a quick funny story about that. I was a sophomore. That was the 2008 year that Tech had just lost to Oklahoma, and the Big 12 dreams were, I think Mike Leach was trying to push for the tie being broken by graduation rate. He was unsuccessful, but I drove up from Thanksgiving. None of my friends were going. I drove by myself from Bernie back up to Lubbock to go watch us play Baylor, because at the time I was like, well, we're gonna be Baylor. It'll be fun. I'll have a good time. And yeah, that quarterback, I can't remember his name for Baylor. He went on to do some good things, but that was a little more. It was very Steelers Cowboys almost. I was way more nervous than I thought I was going to be heading back up to Lubbock after Thanksgiving.
Yeah. John and I remember that trip. That Baylor was just starting to get a little respectable, because they were still 4-8 that year, John.
Yeah.
But you could see the signs that they were becoming a little more competitive, and that was exciting after seeing some many bad years.
They did have that RG3 guy.
That quarterback for Baylor that went on to do some things. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah. Pretty decent career, Baylor.
Right. But bringing it to the future and the present, so neither Baylor nor Texas Tech is exactly in a very good spot this year. Bears are 1-4 with kind of a middling offense and a couple of very key injuries that came down this week. Red Raiders are 2-5. They have 2 close wins over Houston Baptist and West Virginia. So, guys, who do you think needs a win more, Tech or Baylor?
Yeah, given what's happened with Tech over the last couple of weeks and some of the things that have happened with Matt Wells, some of the calls that were made last week in that game against TCU, I honestly think it is Texas Tech, because it is the first year under Dave-Aranda. And, it's getting to, fans are getting restless in Lubbock, which sounds silly to say in 2 years in, not even 2 years in from Matt Wells, his tenure there. I think that they need some positive things to start happening for them a little bit more often. If you're West Virginia, you're looking at that Tech game and you're saying, what, how did that happen? Mm-hmm. And you're kind of kicking yourself a little bit. And I do think that Dave-Aranda getting his program installed in a really, really weird year. I think, 2020, you kind of get a pass for Dave-Aranda. And I think as long as you can see some continued improvement for Baylor, maybe it's, it's like how Tech beat West Virginia. It's a win at the last minute. I think there's enough positive trajectory for Baylor that, I think dave-aranda has a little bit more, I hate to say leash, but I mean, it's his first year in a weird year. And so I think Tech needs to get something done.
Johnny?
Yeah, I agree with Matt. I mean, like he said, Matt Wells, he's in his second year. They need to start showing some improvement. And I've written about this before. I mean, dave-aranda, to me, this is just like a mulligan year. No spring drills, couldn't really get his program going, had to do it all by Zoom early. And now they've got Terrel Bernard out for the year, shoulder injury. Sqwirl Williams, who is starting to come on at running back, he's out with a really bad knee injury. And that's two of your best players right there. And Terrell, he is their best player. So yeah, and I think Tech's going to win this game. I don't know if we want a prediction right here or not, but yeah, Baylor has a lot of things they need to get together before they're a very good football team.
Here's the thing about mulligans, and we may talk a little golf later with our friend Matt, but so the thing about mulligans, Johnny, you recall we had a podcast few weeks ago when Baylor played Texas, and we had our buddies Cedric Golden and Kirk Bowles on from the Statesman, and we were bringing up that idea of you can't judge anybody on 2020, and said, that doesn't play in Austin, Texas. And so I would say that that idea of it's dave-aranda's mulligan year, I'm not sure it plays with the fan base. Fans get restless, even in what's supposed to be a rebuilding year. So I think Baylor fans are hungry for a win, and getting a little antsy and maybe want to see a change at quarterback and all that kind of thing. All that said, I do agree with you guys. I think Tech probably has maybe just a little bit more pressure on it to win, especially because it being a home game as well. So as Matt said, it is Matt Wells' second year there at Tech. And, he didn't exactly inherit a juggernaut from Kliff Kingsbury. But, again, Matt alluded to this, that the Tech fans are getting a little restless there. They were 4-8 last year and are in a similar spot this year. I have always sort of contended that year 3 is when you can kind of start to judge a college football coach, because now he's got his guys in the system. He's got, they should be pretty familiar with what he wants. And then, like I said, we've said several times this year, John, where it's hard to judge anybody on 2020. But my question is this, sort of a long-winded buildup there. Is Matt Wells the answer in Lubbock? Matt, we'll start with you.
It's tough to say right now. I will say I'm encouraged by what I've seen from that team under Matt Wells in the fight that they continue to show. And I talked a little bit about this. Like Tracy Saul and I were just kind of talking last year in passing about, when you watch Tech, what do you think of this team? And I think we both kind of came away with the same impression, is that, man, they battle. And I think that's what you want from a new head coach in Wells, who took over a program that, maybe had those starters, you see Kliff recruited Pat Mahomes, and, he got Terrence Steele and some of those guys out there, and he could recruit frontline talent really, really well. But I think the depth is where Tech has really struggled over the years, and they cannot stack up with a lot of these Big 12 teams from a depth standpoint. And it's one of the reasons I think that Kliff Kingsbury is a great fit in the NFL, because he doesn't have to worry about personnel nearly as much. He can, as Jimbo Fisher says, just worry about ball. And, he can go and get, and I think we've seen that over the last few years at Tech, is he's been able to get some really good players out there, mainly the reigning Super Bowl champion, but they just haven't been able to develop that depth. And I think Matt Wells is starting to get some of that. And he's starting to see, some inroads on the recruiting trail. Cameron Valdez, the guy that we know about down here, signing with Texas Tech. I think winning some of those does help Matt Wells. And I think you see there's several times that, all year long, watching Tech for as long as I have, especially under Kliff, you would kind of have that catastrophic moment, and you're like, man, this team's done. They're not, get a punt blocked, something like that. And I think in that Texas game this year, there was 7 or 8 catastrophic moments, maybe in the first half, and Texas Tech was able to battle their way back. So is he the answer? I would just trust in Kirby Hocutt, because Kirby Hocutt brought, Tim Tadlock to Tech. He brought Chris Beard to Tech, and Chris Beard's another guy that's trumpeted Matt Wells and said Matt Wells is going to be a star. He said that on a podcast earlier this summer, that he thinks Matt Wells is going to be great. So, the answer, I think that there's some signs there that show that he can be. I think he's just got to get a little bit more consistent, and he's got to win those close games. I mean, that's been his bugaboo here. So, maybe it starts this weekend. Tech really hasn't had you haven't really felt great about a season since maybe 2013, when you go into the offseason, going from the season to the offseason, you really haven't felt a lot of positive. And that, they beat Arizona State in the Holiday Bowl that year. And then, again, that was with a lot of Tommy Tuberville's players, as we found out later on. I mean, but I think that Matt Wells is the answer right now for Texas Tech. Yeah, I think he's moving in the right direction.
John?
Yeah, obviously, Matt knows a lot more about Tech than I do. But I think by now you would have liked to seen more improvement. But I think the jury's definitely out on him, and I think he's going to do better than Kingsbury, and he's going to have to keep his job. But I don't know yet. I mean, we'll see. I mean, from everybody you hear, he's a really good coach. He's had success in the past. Dave-Aranda would definitely say he's a very good coach. They coached together. They were 11-2 in 2012.
Has Dave-Aranda coached with everyone in the Big 12?
Seems like it.
Yeah, I've done quite a few coaching connection stories, and I'll have another one Saturday.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, it's kind of saved me a little bit, because once they start losing, you kind of get in the same old grind. Well, they got to win this game, but at least it's give me a little variety here.
A little storyline to follow. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. But I think the jury's still out on Matt Wells.
Yes, I agree that I think this was probably not a fair question to ask y'all, because, like I said, to me, you can't really judge a coach until about year 3. So we'll see. I think, maybe we circle back and ask this question again in a year, but I agree with Matt that, he does have a good proven track record. They made a bowl more often than not at Utah State, had some really good seasons there. Obviously a very different conference, a very different landscape. But give him some time. I mean, that's what you have to do. You have to give him some time, and then we'll judge it maybe a little bit down the road.
And I think that for Tech fans, I think most of them, most rational thinking Tech fans, they don't expect him to go to Big 12 championships every year. They do expect, the consistent competitive teams, like with Leach, it was always, you're going to win one you probably shouldn't, and honestly, you're probably going to lose one that you shouldn't on several occasions. And so I just think they want a team that's competitive, that's in the mix, and I think you're seeing the beginnings of that. I just think, Tech fans would like to see a little bit more, a little bit quicker, especially here down the stretch where you got Baylor, you've got Kansas, and you've got Oklahoma State. Really, it's hard to go to Stillwater and win a game against Oklahoma State, but they just need some positive momentum, like I said, going into the offseason.
Yeah. And not to chase a squirrel here, but Matt, you mentioned Tracy Saul, a past podcast guest of ours.
Oh man, I lose the great Tracy Saul.
The great Tracy Saul. He was a great player at Tech, and of course a Red Raider living here in Waco, as is our colleague Chad Conine.
Right.
We probably can't have Chad on. He gets a little too salty, and we'd have to hit the bleep button a few times.
Yeah. That's the Tech fan existence right now, though, on the football season. You just kind of, you got to have that bleep button ready a little bit.
Yeah. But speaking of chasing a squirrel, how about that for a segue? So Baylor got some devastating injury news this week. They do lose their Sqwirl in Craig Sqwirl Williams, and also Terrel Bernard. You guys mentioned that earlier. Season-ending injuries for those guys, two dynamic players on both sides of the ball. And as John said, to me, Bernard, I don't even think it's arguably. I think he was absolutely Baylor's best player, leading the Big 12 in tackles per game, fifth in sacks. But it's also easy to forget that Terrel Bernard was a backup at the start of the 2019 season. He didn't come on until Clay Johnston got hurt and suffered his own season-ending injury. So is there a Terrel Bernard breakout guy waiting in the wings? John, I'll start with you.
Boy, that's a pretty high bar. Because Terrell, once he replaced Clay last year, I mean, Clay was having a phenomenal year.
Yeah.
But Terrell might have been even better when he stepped in. He played like an all Big 12 linebacker.
Yeah.
The guy replacing Terrell is Abram Smith, who hasn't played very much. I think he has 2 tackles this year. So, I don't know if he's going to step up like Terrell did last year. That's going to be very hard. But at least, he'll have a shot here. I think some other guys are going to have to step up. Guys like William Bradley King, he might have to get more sacks with them. Dylan Doyle, who's done a really good job at middle linebacker. He might have to become more of a big play guy. They're guys in the secondary. Both their cornerbacks got interceptions last week, Kaline Barnes and Raleigh Texada. So, I mean, they have some guys, some veteran guys who can step up and do a good job. But boy, what a big loss. And the thing is, he's just as good a guy off the field. I mean, every time I've interviewed him, I've just been really impressed. Just the way he answers questions, just his perspective on things. Just seems like a kind of a mature voice in the locker room. So yeah, that's a really big loss.
Yeah, and I think it's tough, because that's instantly where my mind went was, well, Terrell filled in for Clay last year. And I think, looking for a video of Abram this year, I've got a touchdown of him at running back against SFA, but that's about it. That's all, he's been playing running back. He's a converted linebacker. So I think it's tough to expect a guy like that, came out of a very good high school football program there in Abilene High Eagles, baby. But I think that there's going to be some drop off there, as you would expect. But I do think, like John said, I think that there are some guys on that defense that are stepping up that can kind of fill in around him a lot, like last year. That team did for Terrell when he first stepped in there, and then against Oklahoma State, he takes a fumble back for a touchdown in his first game, and it kind of announced his presence. And then a couple of weeks later, he's tackling 19 guys at TCU. So I think that it's a little bit tough to expect that kind of production from a guy like Abram Smith. I just like you said, I think not only with dave-aranda and Ron Roberts there to kind of help him through that, but Terrell's kind of right there behind him, and he's going to mentor him. So there will be a drop off, but I think the other guys around him will step up and help him through this.
Yeah, I think that's who it's on. I think it's on those other guys. It's on the guys that you guys mentioned, like William Bradley King, and one that John you didn't mention was Jalen Petrie. I mean, another guy that's been in the program for a few years now, and has some playmaking abilities. So it'll have to be a collective effort, but I don't think you replace guys like Terrel Bernard easily. I mean, that's why he was playing at an All-American level. So yeah. Those guys don't grow on trees. But so around the league this week, the only other game in the Big 12 is West Virginia and TCU. And the Frogs are 3-3 this year, kind of mediocre team. But all 3 wins came over their in-state Texas rivals. They beat the Longhorns, they beat the Bears, and they beat the Red Raiders. I actually saw a tweet, and I don't even remember who this was from. It could have been just some Joe Schmo fan, but that suggested that Gary Patterson is actually overrated as a coach. And it got me thinking about that little thesis. And so I present it to you guys. Is he overrated, underrated, properly rated?
I mean, having watched him for as long as I have, I actually went to his football camp as a junior in high school.
Nice.
And,
All right.
yeah. So you know, I've seen him up close. I think he's properly rated. I mean, I think every press conference, you know, when I've been in Lubbock, when I've been here, you always talk about Gary Patterson and that defense and just the way that he gets his teams to play. Most of the time, you're going to get a tough, physical, athletic defensive team, and he seems to be able to find those kind of gems, you know, hybrid guys to play on that defense that turn into stars in this league. You know, is he? I definitely don't think he's overrated. I think he's got an extended track record of success, taking, you know, the program into the Big 12. Had a couple rough years, but then, you know, goes to the Peach Bowl and destroys Ole Miss after, you know, that memorable or, you know, forgettable 2014 year for Baylor and TCU fans left out of the playoff that year. But I think that I think he's properly rated. I think he's a great coach, and I think people give him his due. And it's not like he's winning the Big 12 every year, or he's in the, you know, he's in that top half usually, but he's never going to be in that bottom half. So I think we've got Gary Patterson slotted pretty well.
Johnny?
Yeah, I think he's a really good coach, and I'm assuming that comment probably came from a Baylor fan.
It could have been. Could have been.
Because obviously Baylor fans hate Gary Patterson.
Well, right.
One thing really interesting about this game, though, West Virginia is 4-0 at home. I mean, even without fans, that's a long trip. And, you know, so that's an advantage for them. But TCU's is 2-0 on the road this year. They've won, they beat Texas in Austin, and of course beat Baylor here. So, you know, they're a pretty good road team, I guess. They haven't been that good of a home team. I mean, they're 3-3 overall. But I think maybe some of their road success goes back to their toughness under Gary Patterson. Probably their, you know, they're probably kind of taught, you know, how to handle the environment. I mean, he's been there a long time. And, you know, I think there's a certain toughness about his teams. And I think that's kind of displayed in road games.
And I think, sorry, Bryce. I just think, you know, he snapped I think he does get up to play in-state schools, especially too. I mean, you look at the 3 wins this year, they're all in-state, as you mentioned, Bryce. I think SMU's Twitter trolled him a little bit though with the skillet and said, well, hold on there. I don't think you're quite Texas.
You're not quite the state champ. Yeah.
Yeah. So if there is going to be a letdown against a good team like West Virginia, I think it's going to be, like you said, this week on the road, traveling east a long way against a team that, I mean, it's a Big 12 team, but it's not one of the traditional powers that Gary Patterson teams get up for. And I think that's where you get into, you know, he's properly rated, is sometimes they do go lay an egg in games where, you know, maybe you wouldn't expect him to do that.
Yeah. I agree with you guys. I think Gary Patterson's a good coach. I think he maximizes his talent, and TCU certainly has had some teams in contention, you know, in the Big 12. I mean, one that was on the brink of making the Final Four that first year of the college football playoff. So, I mean, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. And as Matt said with Matt Wells earlier, I think that's probably what TCU fans expect, is to be competitive, and then every 2 or 3 years have a team that, you know, is really pretty good and you know, can win 10 or 11 games. So guys, it's Masters week, which is weird to say in November. And so Matt, you're a big golf guy. You were telling us you covered the Masters like 9 times. So
9 times.
Yeah, that's really cool, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
So what's your favorite thing about, you know, covering the Masters, and do you have a good story from Augusta?
Man, I've got so many good stories. I've been blessed to be in some pretty awesome positions down there, working with CBS Sports, and I think my favorite thing is just the ambiance of being there. Like every time I'll go out there, I've worked several different shifts. I've worked at different times of the day, but I'll always try and go find some time to go out there, go to the snack stand, spend $5 and get my entire lunch, and then go sit under a pine tree down an Amen corner, go sit in the bleachers at 15 or something like that, and just taking in the ambiance of the tournament and the buzz. And it's just a really, really cool place, and it's hard to do it justice talking about it and even seeing it on TV, because you go out there and you just kind of just being in the moment, and there's no cell phones, which is incredible. No cell phones allowed. So you just go out there. No one can get a hold of you. You're away. You're watching golf, and you're focused on that 100%. And just the beautiful scenery around you. I mean, in April, typically the azaleas are in bloom, and everything just looks perfect. There's not a blade of grass out of place. There's not a piece of trash on the ground. They take a lot of pride in that. So just being out there and soaking it all in is one of my favorite things to do. And the other thing, probably one of my favorite memories working with CBS, I've got a ton, but the Butler Cabin ceremony that they do, some might call it the most awkward television there is, but I think it's still really neat to me, and what I would help block that ceremony out. So on Thursday morning and then again on Sunday morning, me and 3 buddies would go to Butler Cabin, and Jim Nantz would be there, and Billy Payne would be there.
Did you ever get to wear the green jacket?
No, I did. They had me mock it. They had me wear Jim's, or I don't think it was Jim's, but it was one of the CBS blue blazers. So
okay.
I put the blue. I've done it. I've done it several times, and so I've been the past champion. I've been the low amateur. I've been the champion, and so I've played a lot of different roles. And Jim Nantz would interview me as if we just won the Masters, and sometimes it was, if there was a more serious tone in there, depending on who was in there, and he'd ask me golf questions, but there would be other times where he'd ask people, he'd be like, so Carter, when you go to In-N-Out, what's your go-to order? And just a Jim Nantz tone. And, I think this was like three or 4 years in a row that I'd done it. And I walked in and I shook Jim's hand as, like we used to do in the world, shake people's hands. And he looked at me, he goes, wow, back here once again, and an unprecedented run at Augusta National. And I was like, this can't get, I somehow went from past champion to new champion to low amateur. So I've played a lot of roles. So that definitely was, those were some fun times mocking up. And I've got a DVD somewhere. I gotta go find it. But the DVD was when I was the past champion. And as you know, the past champion does not say anything. So I was kind of there on my hands with my blue CBS blazer on my lap.
That's very cool. Very cool. Well, you have a good reason for missing this year, which tell us what that is.
So my wife and I are expecting our first child, little girl. My wife's 38 weeks. So we're just kind of at this point where I got my bags packed, and I'm tethered to the house. So there's a radius where I can leave. So I'm not even going too far out to shoot high school football games these days, because I got to be ready for the bat signal.
Yeah, well, that's awesome, man. That's yes, congratulations, and
thank you.
That's awesome. And I'm sure your wife will at least let you watch, Augusta on the high def TV there. So
yeah, right, yeah. Well, I was joking when they told us the due date originally. I was like, well, if it's my daughter, I bet she's gonna want to try to get out here and see a November Masters just to see what that looks like.
That's funny. Well, Matt,
I wanted to add something. I'm not a huge golf fan, but if there's a guy who will skip the ball 5 times across the water and make the shot, I would watch every round of every tournament.
I think one of the tweets this week was, "Do it on Sunday, you coward."
Well played. Well played. Yeah. Well, in honor of the Masters, in honor of Matt being here, I will just close by saying goodbye, friends.